Hello there. In this short little lecture, I'd like to speak to you about St. Augustine's view of the world. In philosophy and in physics, when we speak of the genesis of the world, theories about how the world came into being, that's called cosmogony, from genesthai, which means to be born, and cosmos, which in Greek means both order and beauty. There's this element of beauty in the word cosmos, as opposed to chaos, which means disorder and lacking in beauty. So where did this beautiful order come from? Also, we have a field which is very closely related to metaphysics, which is called cosmology. That's the nature of the universe, of the cosmos. So let's take a look at St. Augustine's cosmogony and cosmology. St. Augustine's cosmogony is his theory of the creation of the universe and of its inhabitants. That is, the creation of the world. The main sources of information in the cosmogony of St. Augustine are his commentaries on the work of the 6 days in a book that he called On Genesis. All these books he wrote in Latin, of course. And in the last 3 books of his famous book called The Confessions, he speaks of Genesis. So I'm drawing these ideas from those 2 sources. For Augustine, the world was created by God out of pure love for the intelligible creatures, that is, for angels and humans. So these kind of ideas you need to take your time with and let seep in. So if the answer to the question, why did God create the world? It was out of love, out of overfullness. There's also this notion of to share in his own beatitude. So out of pure love for intelligible creatures, that is, for angels and for humans. And he did that because he wanted to associate these intelligible creatures, these angels and humans, with his own beatitude. So he needed to create the world so that he could reveal himself through humans. So how can this be? Augustine asserts that since with God, his word is both his will and his power, God also needed to speak, and through the power and will of this divine speech, the world came into being. So this too is an incredible idea, that when we speak, we're reflecting the world, we're commenting on the world, but when God speaks, according to Augustine, that speech is the unfolding of the world. In the beginning was the Word. So his word, this logos, is the unfolding of the world. It's a very sublime idea. So God only needed to speak, and through the power and will of this divine speech, this logos, the world came into being. Now, it's very important whether we use the word came or comes. If you say the world came into being, then you presuppose there is this being that created the world, and that before that this being created the world, and then there's a separation between the world and the beings. If you say comes into being, if you turn it into a gerund, then this idea is called creation from eternity. And it's not real clear to me what side of the fence Augustine sits on this point. Is it that he created the world in one vision? That's definitely the case. But is the unfolding of the world the creation of the world as it unfolds? But let's not worry about that for now. Let's try to just understand this cosmogony as he sets it forth in the Confessions and on Genesis. So God speaks, and through the power and will of the divine speech, the world came into being, or comes into being. We need to think about that. Furthermore, with God, the world was created ex nihilo. So that means out of nothing. Ex is out of, nihilo is nothing. This means that the world was created without any pre-existing matter. Okay, so that's a little confusing in Genesis, because when you read Genesis in the Bible, there's the firmament, and then he creates the world out of the firmament. But then what could ask, well, where did the firmament come from? So St. Augustine solves this problem. Everything was created out of nothing, including the firmament. Because if it were created with pre-existing matter already there, this firmament, then the question could be raised, well, where did the pre-existing matter come from? If it always was, then this firmament would be eternal. It would be like God. And then there would be two eternal realities. But God is the single, simple, eternal reality. So God then would not be the one eternal, simple being, which is the very definition of God. So therefore, Augustine claims and defends the idea that God created the world out of nothing. Now, for Augustine, the world is completely dependent upon God. It's dependent upon God because the world only is because God is, and because by a free decision of his supreme goodness, he has willed its existence. So to look beyond this free decision of God in his supreme goodness for the cause of creation, Augustine claims is pure foolishness. It's to look for a cause of God himself, who has no cause, but is eternal, and hence nothing could cause God to come into being, for he always was and always will be. God is therefore eternal and causing himself throughout eternity, an eternal self-causing being. This word is called sui generis. That means self-causing. Okay, so God causes himself. But there was no time when God was not. I'm getting these little pop-ups on my computer. I'm sorry. Oh God, this is so strange. All right, here, back to the sublime. So God is the first cause and has no cause. For the will of God has no cause, it is the cause. And since this cause is the will of a perfect good, all that God wills must needs be good. So this is the best of all possible worlds. Later on, the great German philosopher Leibniz will develop this idea that this is the best of all possible worlds. Even if we see evil in the world, there's this big issue in theology. It's called the problem of evil. And it goes like this. If God is all good, all knowing, all powerful, then why do good people suffer? Why do bad people prosper? Well, theologians answer that in different ways. Some people are satisfied by the answer, and those who lack the sufficient faith in those words, find it unacceptable. Let me just share a little digression with you about that. There's a great French poet and writer, Voltaire, who wrote Candide, and he was under the sway of Leibniz, that comes later in modern philosophy, who believed, like Augustine, that this is the best of all possible worlds. And Leibniz proves it. He has these incredible proofs that you have to really rack your brains to follow, and it all fits together perfectly logically. It's quite impressive. But he proves that this is the best of all possible worlds. And Voltaire was under the sway of Leibniz at that time. And then the Franco-Prussian War broke out, and he was right there in the front lines. And then, I forget the date, but in Lima, Peru, on All Saints' Day, the earth just opens up and swallows 21,000 people. And so that made him rethink this whole idea that this is the best of all possible worlds. So he creates Candide, which is an incredible work, which is satire on this whole notion that this is the best of all possible worlds. So these ideas are taken up by other philosophers, writers, and to become privy to that is what it means to be a student of liberal arts, because then you can read Leibniz and you appreciate, when he has his one character called Pangloss. Pan means everything, gloss, to gloss over. Pangloss is teaching Candide, which is the main character of Voltaire's Candide, that this is the best of all possible worlds. Well, you have to gloss over the Franco-Prussian War. You have to gloss over the earthquake that just swallowed 21,000 people and so on. So anyhow, I wanted to share that with you as a little digression to show you that these ideas are picked up by other writers, and this is what it means, to be educated in the liberal arts. All right, so back to the cosmogony. So according to Scripture, St. Augustine claims, God created all things at once. So the 6 days of creation are a metaphor intended to help our imagination by a simple instantaneous act. God created ex nihilo all the beings which then were. But in these creatures, he also created all those creatures who have come to be ever since the first instant of creation as well, all the way up to the end of the world. Therefore, in one single instantaneous act, God created all creatures who were in the past, who are now, and who will be in the future. This was possible, Augustine argues, because the world was big with seminal reasons. So this is an interesting idea I'd like to focus on a little bit, because I think it solves the problem of the dilemma, which I believe is a false dilemma, between creationism versus evolution. This is a big issue even today among certain people. It made like a dilemma. It bifurcated. Certain people believe, well, there's either evolution or God created the world just like it was now, then like it is now. That evolution is anti-religious. So you have these two opposing positions. But it's pretty hard to refute evolution, right? I mean, the theory of natural selection is just fact. There couldn't be all these species that humans make, like all these species of dogs, for example, unless humans took over the natural selection and we started doing human selection, and then we create all these species of dogs, of rabbits, of everything, all the domestic animals. So that wouldn't work if there wasn't such a thing as natural selection, So anyhow, it dominates all of modern biology. If my biology professors, who are my friends, say that if you reject Darwin, you reject all modern biology. And somebody even corrected me and said all modern science, because it finds its way all the way into physics and chemistry and so on. But there's no reason to go into that too far. But when I was looking at my notes, I realized that Saint Augustine solves this problem implicitly. He didn't directly solve it, because there was no dilemma between evolution, because Darwin came much later, as you know. But implicitly, there's a solution, because you just need 3 words. God created evolution. And it solves the dilemma. In fact, it gives to God more wisdom than saying that he created the world and now we have to figure out how all these other species came into being and either reject or accept evolution. You can accept both sides. It's called moving between the horns of a dilemma. So I find that implicit in this idea of seminal reasons. In this first vision, this first word that he speaks, where the world comes into being, the world was full of seminal reasons, from semen, which means seed. That is, with seed-bearing reasons, with the seeds or germs of all future beings. See, there's evolution, but he doesn't use the word evolution. Furthermore, since to create mutable beings is tantamount to creating time, by the way, that's the very definition of time in physics. It's the mutability of matter. You know, when they want to, if you think about it, time is nothing other than the changing and the breaking down of matter. That's one way of looking at it. So to create mutable beings is tantamount to creating time, since time is nothing other than the mutation of beings. It therefore can be said that the succession of all future times was created at once, together with the totality of all future beings, at once in the very instant of creation. Okay, so I just put two and two together and realized that this solves this whole dilemma of either creationism versus evolution. You just need three words. God created evolution. And then you can have your cake and eat it. By the way, why not eat a cake if you have it? I never understood that, by the way. Why have a cake if you can't eat it, right? So this doctrine of seminal reasons that the first beings contained and passed down the seeds of all future generations results in minimizing the importance of all secondary efficient causes. Aristotle spoke of four causes of things, and then we don't need to go deep. Well, we'll talk about Aristotle later when we talk of St. Thomas Aquinas. But the efficient cause is the most important. Like if I have a chalice, the chalice is made of silver. So the silver is the material cause of that chalice. Without silver, there can be no chalice. Okay, then there's the formal cause of the chalice. So that's the shape the chalice has in the mind of the chalice maker before he made it. And when he pours the molten silver into the dye, he has that vision, that shape of the chalice. That's the form. Then there's the teleological cause. That's the purpose of the chalice for the sacramental sacrament. And then there's the efficient cause, the actual pouring the silver into the mold and making the chalice. So there's four causes, they all work together, and the result is the coming into being of a chalice. But as time went by, the three other causes fell by the wayside, and all that's left were the efficient causes. Then they start speaking in theology about primary and secondary efficient causes. So St. Augustine emphasized the primary efficient cause, which is God for all things. But some people, like St. Thomas Aquinas, who I want to look at with you, criticized St. Augustine for that. So what does that mean? That would mean like when you start thinking about the causes of things. Like, how did you come into being? Well, because of your mother and father. So the coming together of your mother and father and the process of spermiogenesis and oogenesis, that's a secondary cause. The primary cause was God, who planted the seeds in the first vision that were passed down until now. So people like St. Thomas Aquinas criticized those who followed St. Augustine on this idea. The most famous Neoplatonist, second to St. Augustine, is St. Bonaventure. So St. Bonaventure followed St. Augustine, but St. Thomas Aquinas criticized that. So among the various creatures of God's creation are those of heaven and there are those of earth. And Augustine claims that by heaven in Scripture, what that means is there are mutable yet unchanging spiritual substances. This is a strange idea because it sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? Because mutability means it changes, and then unchanging is the contradiction. But not, we have to be careful. It's the contrary. But St. Augustine claims there are these mutable yet unchanging beings. So I had to think about that a little bit. And as I read on, then it dawned on me what it means. There are these beings who were human and mutable, but in their passing, that mutability became eternal. So you have people like St. Francis. He's going to always be St. Francis. Okay, after whom this Pope took his name. So there's St. Francis. He's always St. Francis. He's going to say the same things always in the writings of St. Francis. The legends are going to always be the same. There's the constancy of that. It's like frozen. It's a mutability that's frozen. It's sort of like playing a song, like recording a song. And then the song, you play it again, it's exactly the same. So it's mutability, but it's the same. So these angels are unchanging spiritual substances. They're corporeal changing substances or bodies, heavenly bodies. He writes, the sweetness of beatific contemplation at once withdrew them from change, so that, changeable by nature, they become immutable in fact. Their mode of duration is neither eternity, which belongs properly only to immutable essence, namely God, nor are they temporal, which is the duration of beings whose nature is subject to change. But he uses a very carefully chosen word in Latin, aevum, A-E-V-U-M. And what that means is a mode of duration proper to mutable natures, but does not change, because they have achieved their perfection. So these angels are spiritual substances which are perfect. They're mutable natures that do not change. Although they were mutable, they were lifted above all time, and now they exist as unchanging forms of mutability. So whereas heaven designates a substance immediately stabilized under its forms, earth designates a formless matter, which form will succeed. What he means by this is that matter is formless, but it takes on form. What helps is to understand what Plato means by ideas. And then what St. Augustine does is makes a bigger deal about these ideas being in God's mind from all eternity. So the form of things in the world is nothing other than the forms, these divine ideas that God has in his mind. So matter, or corporeal beings, does not exist without some form, nor was it created by God prior to forms. Rather, corporeal matter is to form in the same relation as inarticulate sound is to articulate voice. It's a good metaphor because in the beginning was the Word, and it's through the Word that the world is unfolding. So matter is turned into being by its form, as a meaningless sound is turned into a meaningless word by human speech. Taken in itself, therefore, matter or earth is neither a being nor pure nothingness. Further removed from God than any other creature, it is something that is nearly nothing. Augustine comments often on the scriptural text in Wisdom 18, 2:18, which states, "For thy almighty hand, which made the world of matter without form." So the forms are in God's mind. For Augustine, the forms of created beings are so many images of participation in the divine ideas. From this point of view, everything has a twofold existence. The one as it is in itself, the other as it is in its divine idea. In God, however, by contrast, the thing, the essence, is existence, but every other thing has a twofold reality. The created thing in itself is but an imitation of its model in God. For example, in man, there are various notions of God which vary according to each individual person. These are various imitations of the exemplar model of the reality of God. So taken as a whole, the universality of beings, all things visible and invisible, exhibit this form because they participate in these divine ideas. And the degree to which they participate in those ideas, that's their degree of perfection. So as soon as we relate certain beings to one another, every created being is determined by an intelligible formula, as I was saying, by a ratio or a divine idea, which defines what it has to be according to its nature. Thus, it has a definite shape, a definite form, definite order, a particular measure, and a particular beauty, which is connected with proportion. Even change, this is a more subtle idea, even change in its becoming through time can be expressed in intelligible terms by means of numbers, like we talk about speed or how fast something goes, or we can look at the numbers. As soon as we do that, we take change and we reduce it to a particular pattern. We look at the constancy in change. Or when we look at things statistically, for example. So when we relate certain beings to other beings by numerical relations, that's really to reduce change to a rule that does not change. And Augustine thinks that this is to redeem becoming from time by revealing it in its elements of constancy. Like, for example, the unfolding of the seasons. They come around the same way every year. So there's the constancy. But no two moments are ever the same. So there's the change. So matter, the created matter, is a combination of constancy and change. The constancy is the form. That's the idea, the divine ideas in God's mind, into which these things, this formless matter, participates. So the unity of order, this cosmos, this beautiful order, among the divine parts of each beings of the world, which make up this cosmos, concur with the laws of their succession in time and give the world its beauty. And so he says, the world then appears as a progressive unfolding of an immense poem, whose every single word contributes to the meaning of the whole. While this word, each word, is itself deriving its fullness from the whole. That's a beautiful metaphor. If you look at a poem, each word takes on its fullness from the whole. But each word is also part of the whole. So that's how he sees each being in the world. Okay, so that's a kind of overview of St. Augustine's view of the world. Next time we'll look at what he thinks about man and knowledge.